Good morning, everybody. Today is January 28th. It's 11 in the morning right now, and from where the last take ended, it was January 26th. And I ended up not speaking yesterday. I just my energy levels were low, and there's been a couple things that have nothing major, but just I've had a couple strange interactions with a few different people over the past couple days, and so it's kind of just I've been in my own mind trying to figure things out. And so essentially right now I'm parked down, and I'm on the Oregon coast right now, so I'm parked at the harbor. I'm not saying where I'm at, but I'm parked at the harbor, where there's a lot of boat traffic. And so you might see me kind of looking beyond the camera, watching people. There's a little walking path on the other side of beyond my van, and so there's people going to be walking past, and so it's just a matter of, I'm always paying attention to anything moving around me. So if you see me looking beyond, well, it's probably because there's people walking past. So just that's what I'm looking at. And again, we're in my little studio. We're completing by the within a couple days at the end of January. That's going to mark the seven months of being inside the van. And so, I mean, if you have any type of empathy in your heart, or you have the ability to put yourself in other people's shoes, well, I'm just saying, imagine if you were me and you were living within the confines of this specific vehicle. I'm not talking about some $80,000 Mercedes Sprinter van or any type of luxury travel van. No, I'm talking about a 37-year-old Ford Econoline. This is my bathroom. If I'm not near a public restroom where I can't get out of my van and go use a public restroom, or if it's in the middle of the night, well, this is my bathroom. At nighttime I have no interior lighting. This thing does have lights, but they don't work. So once it's dark out, all I have is my cell phone. And that's pretty much it, or a headlamp. And so it's 12 to 14 hours of darkness, or it's like, all you gotta do is look it up. But where I'm at, I'm spending, 14 hours of darkness in the van. So that's been fun. So I'm saying, imagine if you were me, imagine how this type of lifestyle, being stuck in this situation, where over a period of time, weird lady just walking, goofy look on, man. Look, there's gonna be some, because of what I'm about to talk about, it will not distract me if I have weird people lurking around my vehicle, just like that. I'm saying, imagine being in my vehicle for all of this time, and imagine if it was you. And I'm saying, imagine how it would affect your psychology, your mind, after being in a vehicle for 7 months, this type of vehicle, not some luxury travel van or RV or motorhome or whatever you got, maybe something that you got, but I'm saying this type of vehicle. And imagine asking for help for 7 months and doing everything in your power by stepping on camera and speaking, trying to get people to pay attention. Not only pay attention, but look around at what's actually going on. And then once you look around at what's actually going on, being able to identify who's behind all of this stuff and doing something about it. And so I've been 7 months. Imagine if you were me. For 7 months, you've been calling for help, and you've been doing everything in your power to explain the situation and where you're coming from, so that whoever does find your videos, they might be able to, if they spend the time, they can start putting things together, and they can actually figure out what is going on and actually do something about it, as far as holding these guilty parties accountable for what they did. And so one of the big things that these guilty parties have been banking on is that, yeah, some of these things that have happened, yeah, it happened 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. And part of their strategy, as far as the bad guys, is where if they don't get caught right then and there and they're not held accountable right then and there as they're doing these things, they bank on this idea where after enough propaganda, after enough gaslighting and deflecting and blame shifting, after a period of time, people's mind, like your mind, your psychology, you start getting worn down in the context of these things that these things that happened, and some of these things that happened may have really affected your life in a negative way. And so these guilty parties are banking on this idea where if enough time, if enough time goes by, eventually the victims will either, they become so psychologically, physically, and spiritually exhausted that they stop trying to pursue any type of justice or accountability for those guilty parties who did all those things, if that makes sense, right? And so with my current situation, yes, some of these things that I'm talking about happened 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. And I'm saying what the bad guys have been banking on is for all of you who have known about me and you know about what happened back then, they have been trying to psychologically manipulate you to either forget entirely about it, and then because I haven't let it go, they're manipulating you to come after me to try and get you, or you guys are trying to get me to let it go so everybody else can just go move on with their life. But at the same time, my life was fucking destroyed, and I've been blacklisted, and I've been living in my van for 7 months asking for help, and at face value, I have nobody to talk to about my situation, and anybody who I end up talking to, they just try and they either pretend that everything I'm sharing with them is non-significant and it's just me in my head. They're gaslighting me. They're trying to steer me in a specific direction and divert my attention away from those who are involved. I know what they're doing, and so whenever it is I do interact with anybody, and I'm trying to let them know that I do need help, and I am, I'm reaching out, trying to let people know, but they act like everything I'm sharing with them is non-significant, and they just pretend. It's like it's almost like I'm talking to a deaf person. I'm wasting my time and energy talking to somebody because in a short time they're just going to turn around and walk away from me, and there's going to be no resolve. I'm not getting at face value. It just doesn't appear I'm getting any closer towards any type of justice. However, I do know things actually are happening. I'm just talking about face value. Okay, so I'm saying the bad guys out there have been banking on this idea where after 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years or so, they have been banking on this strategy and this idea where if they can fuck with me for a long enough period of time, that they would either break my mind and my spirit where I would just outright commit suicide. That's one strategy. If they could do that, that's probably the best thing they could do. If they could break my mind and my spirit and get me to self-terminate. But that's not going to happen. Okay, so that's one strategy. A second strategy they've been trying to do is every single person who I encounter in my life, pretty much every single person who I have ever talked to, the second strategy has been to give all of them instructions to either outright ignore me, or if I am trying to press forward with speaking about the truth, all of these people who I'm interacting with have instructions to either gaslight me, accuse me of having a psychological disorder, or they'll listen to everything I say, therefore I'm exerting my time and energy towards them, and then they just turn around and walk away, and then they never give me anything they never give back anything of substance or value, as if they actually do care and that they're actually willing to help me. They just walk away and disappear, and we never talk about it again. So there's these different strategies, and if these strategies don't work, they've been trying to isolate me and, you know, just make my life a fucking living hell, to make me feel like I have no friends or support, and to, you know, shut off my finances and my ability to make money, nor my ability to communicate with you and your abilities to communicate with me. And as far as I know, there might be a middle person who's literally anybody who may have already tried donating some money my way through PayPal. Well, I'm saying there might be somebody in the middle who is intercepting whatever money you're trying to give me, and it's going to a different bank account, and they're stealing the money. And then in the same breath, I'm not being notified of any money you have sent me, so I didn't even know you sent anything. And then also whatever messages you have sent me, I haven't received them. So if you're reaching out to me and you're not hearing back from me, or maybe there just might be, you know, when you reach out to me, there could just be this, they have some type of technology or ability to mimic me, where rather than me receiving your message and replying back to you, your message is going to someone else who is using a handle that is identical to mine. You might think you're speaking to me, and you might think that you just gave me money and they're telling you thank you and all this stuff. And I'm just saying that I'm aware of these variables, and they could be happening. I have no way of knowing if they are, but for you as a viewer, if you are somebody who has done this, and you're now hearing you're hearing that I haven't received money from you, and then that's making you scratch your head because you know you've sent money to me and you've talked to somebody. This is me letting you know that there's some really sketchy things that might be happening in the background, which means that you need to start asking bigger questions and investigating what's actually going on. So this is just me communicating to make you aware of things that you might not be aware of, okay? Because if this is a real thing, this needs to get addressed and resolved, so that way anybody who is my friend and supporter and you're reaching out to try to help me, we can actually establish those bridges where we're actually communicating and helping one another, because right now that's not happening, okay? So with that all said, where we're going with this video is, we're going to be continuing from where I left off in the last video. So again, I'm assuming for you as a viewer that you have watched all of those videos, so therefore I don't have to repeat myself, and you're all caught up. But again, if you're a new arrival, you just clicked on this video randomly, or you've known about me and you're just clicking on the most recent video, I am referring you to, it just depends if you've watched my videos or you haven't. If you haven't watched my videos, you are behind, and you need to go all the way back to Welcome to the Rabbit Hole. You know, if you're gonna invest the time in my channel, understand there's like by the time I get all these uploaded, you're looking at like 70 hours worth of information. And I'm saying nothing will make sense to you until you start from square one and watch everything in chronological order. So by the time you do arrive to this video that you're watching right now, everything that you've learned, everything's going to just start making sense to you. But if you're new, or you've been jumping around and now you've clicked on this one, I'm saying you have a lot of puzzle pieces, missing puzzle pieces and links that you don't have, knowledge and information that you have not yet attained, even though I've already talked about a bunch of this stuff. So if you're somebody who has not put in the time and you proceed forward with this video, you're going to be missing a lot. So whatever if say you watch this whole video, whatever you get out of it, you might think you know stuff, or that you have it figured out, but I'm saying you don't see the full picture, and you're only seeing a fragment of the entire story I've painted for you so far. So, this is just a little friendly reminder. If you're a new arrival, you need to, just like picking up a new book series, or starting a new TV show or a TV series, it's just, I'm as an example, I'm saying you need to start back at episode 1, the very first thing, and just make your way through all of the videos in chronological order. And if you can follow those instructions, by the time you reach this video, you might have things relatively figured out, and now you're you're ready for the next batch of information. So any of you who are listening to this and you have watched all these, well, this is the next batch, and this right now we are really going to be getting into the meat and bones, as I've described before. Because I got the board, and it's pretty much same template. It's the same template as before. We're still on this timeline, right? Still on this timeline, and with where the last video ended, we were pretty much right around this time frame between yeah, there we go, December. Yep, so around this time frame, and around this time frame is that's where I'm going to be introducing Kelly into this story. The story I've been telling, and anybody who knows about Kelly, well, this is where she's going to be given her time in the spotlight, if you want to use an analogy. I haven't really been acknowledging her or talking about her at all over all this time. Up until recently, I've kind of just been hinting at this individual named Kelly. And those of you who do know who she is, and you've been waiting for the time and day when I was going to start talking about the things that happened back in 2019, well, this is that time. We've arrived. We're here. And so anybody who wants to know what went down in Eureka, California, January 2019, which led to everything that happened before my arrest in September of 2019, I'm going to be tying a whole bunch of things together to help you connect all these missing dots, connect all the puzzle pieces, but where by the time we arrive to September 2019 on the timeline, as far as what I'm talking about on camera, we're essentially going to be covering this whole spectrum. And as I'm talking about this whole spectrum, not only am I going to be talking about Kelly, but I'll be talking about Dan, and I'll be talking about Jerry, which means, depending on you as a viewer, so long as you stick around, I'm not saying I'm going to be doing all this inside this video. This is going to take, quite a few hours to get through. I'm just letting you know what direction we're heading, right? And so anybody, this is going to help you a lot as far as explaining why things went down the way they did. And I'm going to be explaining it from my perspective. So whatever you know, I'm going to be explaining my perspective of the entire situation. So, this is where you can compare what I share with you with other things that you may have learned from other people. And then for you as a viewer, because I've invited you to pretend like you're a detective and you're trying to solve this giant mystery, trying to figure out who the guilty parties are, who the innocent parties are, who the victims are. This is, this is a challenge for you to see if you can make it through and if you can solve all these things. Because again, all of this information is inside my brain. And I'm extracting all of my memories and all the connections I've made and everything that I have inside my brain, and I'm articulating it for you to hear, to give you the opportunity to find out about the things that I have learned and that I have experienced and that I've gone through over these past 7 years, right? So I'm saying right now we're going to be focusing on December, right around December, January time frame, right around Christmas and New Year's time frame, and then I'll be talking about stuff that happened in between January and February, and then from February to March, and from pretty much this is where a lot of shit went down, and a lot of scary stuff happened in this part, and this is where we're at right now. Okay, so if you've been looking forward to that, well, just hang on, because it's going to get pretty intense. It just depends on what you know and what you don't know. Okay, I got 37 seconds left, so I'm going to reposition the tripod, and then we're just going to jump right in, okay? So go get a glass of water, go use the bathroom, whatever you got to do, because I'm just going to be diving in, and I'm going to be explaining this to you to the best of my ability, okay? So, yep, there we go. Just pause that. We'll shut this off real quick. Alrighty. I hope you guys are ready. You guys hopefully you got your thinking cap on, because this could otherwise be considered an advanced video. It just depends on your ability to retain the information that you've already learned, where as I start talking about things I've already talked about, it's a matter of if you can remember when I talked about those things, and then it's all about these connections, the web that has been forming over a period of months, right? And I'm talking about back then. I'm not talking about right now. You know, there's this web that has been forming over a period of months. You know, from when before I met Dan, there was already this web forming / formed things that were happening in the background without my knowledge. Okay. So before we can proceed forward, we're going to have to go backwards. So sometimes that's part of the riddle. You know, when we're talking about riddles and trying to figure out how to make our way out of this reality, well, sometimes you have to go backwards in order to go forwards. Sometimes before you can go forwards, you have to go backwards and revisit things that have happened in order to make certain connections, in order to access the specific keys / combination to a lock that will open the door and allow you to have some type of internal revelation or an aha moment where these pieces and these connections are formed, and then therefore you can see the bigger picture. Hopefully that makes sense, right? And as I'm saying that, that almost sounds like a scene from Willy Wonka, where Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, the old movie, right? Where Wonka takes it's kind of near the beginning of the movie when Wonka first takes his guests inside the chocolate factory, and they get on the elevator, that crazy elevator, and then they go through the same door that, you know, the guests perceive something as the same door. And he's like, oh no, the only way to go forward is you gotta go backwards. You can't go backwards, you gotta go forwards. You know, I forget exactly what he said, but that kind of tripped that note. So anyways, what we're doing is we're going backwards before we can go forwards. So where we're going right now, I told you the subject, the topic of conversation for this specific video, I'm introducing Kelly into the equation. Okay, so anybody who knows who Kelly is, okay, you know who she is. Any of you who don't know who she is, well, okay, just right now, just as far as a story I'm telling you, just use this name Kelly in your imagination and just look at her as a character within this story that I'm painting for you. But the thing is, she is a real person, she is out there, and she's very dangerous and scary. I mean, she's not somebody to really trifle with, because she's connected to some very bad stuff. Some very bad stuff, of which I'm going to eventually be revealing to you guys, but we're not there yet. So you just got to be patient and allow me to build these connections for you, give you the background information as far as how I even cross paths with her, and then we'll proceed with the story, and I'll tell you about all the crazy stuff that happened once I actually did meet her, you know, and I spent some time with her and her boyfriend, okay? But before we can get there, we're going to be building some connections. And so we're going back in time. We're going to go as far back as March 2018. And so first we're going to be talking about the connections and where these connections originated in the context of when Kelly and I were first connected, okay? So initially, you know, I'm going to draw me right here. Okay, I can make this web very big if I wanted to, but I'm trying to keep it simple. Okay, so this represents me. Okay, and so if you remember, I mentioned you know, you had Jerry, my father Jerry. I'll put Jerry right here. I'll put my dad. Okay, and then you're gonna have Dan right here. Dan, and then I'm going to put Kelly right over here. Sorry for stuttering. Sometimes in my brain I'm speaking two different words at the same time, and then it comes out that way where you can, if you pay attention, sometimes I say words that's not even a word, and like I start repeating myself, It's essentially my brain is getting ahead of my mouth, and I'm in the process of saying a couple different words at the same time, and that's where sometimes I kind of jumble my words. It's just something about me. So if you've ever caught on to any of that stuff. So if you remember back in February, March, you remember when I first found DMT on social media, right? When I first discovered DMT, and then I started researching it, and then eventually I found Dan on social media holding DMT in his hand, and then, you know, I've already explained how I ended up in Las Vegas, right? And I told you, and then I also mentioned that there was a hit on my life. When I crossed paths with Dan, he told me there was a hit on my life. Somebody out there in the world had put a hit on my life, and they intended to have me assassinated. But again, I've already described, I haven't gone into great depth, but essentially I've described that I navigated my way through that ordeal, where rather than being assassinated, I was allowed to walk free, and that was entirely because Dan and whoever is involved with what Dan is up to, they all perceived they could psychologically brainwash and manipulate me in such a way where I would eventually pledge my allegiance to them, therefore give away my power to Dan and look at Dan as somebody like, the person that I've pledged allegiance to him and I've given my soul to him. That's what they were trying to accomplish. So if I had done that, I would have therefore become his little puppet. I would have had to do his biddings if I would have pledged allegiance to him, but that didn't happen, okay? That's what they thought they could accomplish after a period of time, When I first met Dan, they were hoping somewhere in this timeline where, whether it was 6 months or 8 months or 12 months later, they were hoping that at some point I would pledge allegiance to them and fully commit myself to their organization, whatever that even is, okay? So I'm telling you, how I crossed paths with Dan, I'm telling you there were backroom deals, things happening in the background beyond my own awareness, things happening that I'd had no idea was even happening. So when I found Dan holding DMT in that picture on Instagram, it wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't an accident. It was something. It was like bait. It was a trap. It was like, if you think about fishing, and you throw out a thing of bait to hope that, because you're hoping that a fish will bite onto the bait and you can reel it in, as an analogy, right? Well, if they know exactly everything about me, they know about my Instagram account, and they know about everything I've been sharing on my Instagram account back in February, and however they put DMT into my brain as far as me becoming aware of it, they probably manipulated that and made that a thing, and then eventually Dan introduced himself by holding out that bait, they were wondering if I would message him. But again, I told you, when I started sharing everything on Instagram back in February, I started seeing this massive influx of people who were subscribing to my Instagram page, like where I was starting to, I think over a period of a month, I had like 2,000 new subscribers to my Instagram page. So this massive influx of subscribers, I'm not really paying attention to any given person who is following my page. Anybody that's following my page, I'm not clicking on their profile and dissecting their life. For the most part, the majority of the people who are following my page, I know nothing about, which includes Dan. Okay, so when he started following my page, I knew nothing about him. He was just somebody amongst everybody else. And then eventually I found that picture of him holding it. And then eventually, just like if he was casting out bait like you're fishing, and I took that bait, all of a sudden I messaged him. Well, I got reeled in, he reeled me in all the way to Las Vegas. So once I did cross paths with him, when I did meet Dan face to face for the very first time, as he was standing out in his driveway, as I was pulling in my van, it was exactly as if he knew everything about me and he knew who I was. In that same breath, I had no idea who he was. I'd never met this guy. I didn't know anything about him. He was just somebody from Instagram who I was just stopping by to pick up some DMT and maybe even some mushrooms and be on my way. And then once that connection was formed, that's what, everything has evolved in the way that I have the way that I have described so far. I mean, I haven't given you everything, but I've given you a lot to think about so far. And if you remember from when I was originally telling you about this a few videos back in the web, well, I suggested that, you know, because Jerry had called me on the phone the very day I was leaving Redmond to go down to Las Vegas and meet Dan. You know, I thought it was just going to be a few minute interaction with Dan and I'd be on my way. But that's not what Dan had planned. Dan had plans for me to stay there and do DMT at his house, and then that's when he invited me to stay the night. But, you know, so he had a different plan than what I was planning. And I'm saying the day that I left Redmond to go down that direction in my travel van, you know, that's like 1,000 miles or 900 miles from Central Oregon to Las Vegas. And my father, Jerry, called me the day that I was driving out of Redmond, pretty much crying and begging me not to go on my road trip, and then apologizing, telling me he was really sorry. And then at the same time, he was inviting me to not go on my road trip and come back home and stay with him and my mom. And then we could work things out together. But because I told you I brushed him off, I ended up crossing paths with Dan. So I'm telling you that there were things happening in the background, and I'm saying, how do I not know Dan and Jerry at some point in time, whether months previous or weeks, months, or years prior, they had met each other, and they were having conversations about me, where at some point maybe Dan would call for me. You know, if I ever arrived to a time in my life where I started questioning what this reality is and why things are kind of off, if at that point, if I ever arrived to that stage of my own awakening where I'm starting to look around and things aren't really adding up, you know, and then for example, I start talking about this stuff on social media, so therefore I'm starting to break free from this illusion, this dark magic hypnotism that I've been under for however long in my life. That was the day that Dan would get a hold of Jerry, let him know that he's calling me. And then Jerry, you know, because of whatever Jerry did in the past as far as a deal or a bargain or an arrangement or whatever he had made with Dan, you know, how do I know my own father Jerry didn't sell his soul a long time ago in order to attain something that Jerry really wanted? How long ago? I don't know, but how do I not know they didn't establish that connection before I even knew who Dan was? But because of who I am and because I started breaking free from the illusion, I'm saying that, you know, they may have been communicating with each other, which is how I got baited to stop in Las Vegas to begin with. And I told you it was entirely because of how I interacted with Dan when I met him. You know, so there's, you know, obviously Jerry and I are connected, but now this new bridge was connected, right? And now I entirely navigated my way through that, because Dan perceived he could brainwash me to pledge allegiance to him. So so where we're going with this, remember, the subject is Kelly, okay? But I'm just kind of refreshing you on these connections that had been formed. Well, and then I mentioned, you know, just a few minutes ago, I mentioned during the month of February, I started having this massive influx of people who are now following my Instagram page, and I wasn't paying attention to who's who. I wasn't really looking at anybody's stuff. And if I was looking at your stuff, I wasn't really looking at your stuff in a way to figure out who you are as a person. I was just looking at your stuff as a way to see what type of content you were sharing, and if you were somebody who's on the same page as I am, or if you're somebody who's just sharing nonsense, because at the same time I was becoming more and more aware of people that were not necessarily my friend, and people were, you know, those who were starting to troll me, you know, because even though my account was going up and up, that's when I was also seeing an influx of negative comments and messages that I was receiving in my inbox or on my posts, where people were trying to fuck with me. And that's where I started having to learn what was going on in that realm. So what I'm saying is, during that time when Dan started following my Instagram account, at some point during that same time frame, Kelly had started following my Instagram account. I cannot tell you the day or when, but it was somewhere around that time frame, between February, probably sometime around February, is when she started following my Instagram account. Okay, so I'm saying when she started following my Instagram account, this there was a connection formed. It wasn't until later when I actually acknowledged Kelly's Instagram account. Even when I started acknowledging her Instagram account, I wasn't looking at her account as if I was looking at her as a person, in a way where I was wondering, anything about her life. I was just, as far as her Instagram account, when I first became aware of Collectively Unstable, well, at face value, she was somebody who was sitting around like 20 mid 20s to 30,000 subscribers. At face value, okay, well, she has a pretty large community. Okay, she has, as far as social media reality, she has, an impact as far as some type of influence within Instagram's platform. She has a level of influence. And then when you look through her Instagram account, she has a lot of positive things. A lot of, if you really look at it, there's a lot of New Age stuff, spirituality, New Age stuff. And back then, I was just kind of getting introduced to the New Age, this New Age movement, and I wasn't really aware of what it was back then as I was now. But all the same, even with the New Age movement, they use a lot of things that would otherwise lure people towards it. A lot of positivity, right? A lot of the New Age movement is really about entirely focusing on positivity and nothing else. Anything negative, when we're talking about shadow work and acknowledging the evil and the bad things that are out there, and also acknowledging the evil within us and acknowledging our own demons and our own mistakes and things that we've done, so we start learning our lessons. Well, the New Age movement is really about just focusing on the positive only, and that's it. And so back then, I wasn't really aware of what that was, and so that was something I was really starting to explore, like the New Age movement, Gnosticism, and everything within the esoteric reality, everything that's kind of been hidden from people. I started exploring those doors, trying to figure out what that even is and what's behind it. It's part of the process of figuring this stuff out. And so back then, whenever it was that I became aware of Kelly's Instagram page, and I started looking through her stuff, well, that was kind of the direction her account was on, as far as the subject and the theme. Well, she was on this New Age theme as far as the content she was sharing with everybody who was subscribed to her page. But back then, I didn't even know who she was, and I had no reason to have any positive or negative things to think about her. She was just another random person on Instagram that I eventually became aware of. And once I became aware of her, I never actually even really talked to her. It was like, when I became aware of her, it wasn't really until, I don't know, maybe it was sometime probably around the time I made it to Montana. When I made it to Montana, that's when I think Kelly and I started talking to each other as far as messaging back and forth on social media. But even then, I didn't even know who she was. It was sometime around July and August when her and I actually started talking to each other. And I'm saying it wasn't until later. I mean, I know for a fact that Dan and I know for a fact that these two are connected. Now here in 2025, and even back at later 2019, I made those connections. But for you as the viewer, I'm just letting you know these two are connected. And the question that I don't have the answer to is, how long have they been connected? And when I was telling you that there were backroom deals and things happening beyond what I was aware of, things happening, that arrangements and deals being made that would affect my life dramatically without my knowledge. There were people making these decisions behind my back. And I told you, Dan and Jerry were behind it. And how do I not know, these guys are all connected? How do I not know Jerry and Kelly are communicating, just like Kelly's communicating with Dan, and just like Dan's communicating with Jerry, this whole thing, and they're all talking, they're all making plans about me, right? So, and in the same time, I can add to this, we can add a stick figure here, one stick figure, you say, I can easily expand upon this web. Let me reposition this guy a little bit better. But essentially, you know, I can add a stick figure here. Or actually, no, sorry. I'm just trying to make the web look the best way. So just as far as about positioning. So I'll put a stick figure here. I'll put a stick figure here. And I'll put a stick figure up here. Okay? And then if you want to know what those stick figures represent, we'll just say Dan's friends. Dan's friends. Okay? And again, one stick figure represents all of Dan's friends and connections. Okay? Everybody that is on Dan's team, right? So that could be thousands of people, you know, or more, you know, tens of thousands. So this, I'm just saying, so that this one stick figure represents all of Dan's friends. Okay, and then this stick figure represents Kelly's friends. So Kelly's friends. Okay, and then this one, obviously, Jerry's friends. Jerry's friends. You know, friends, connections, you know, just how, whatever terminology you want to use. So, you know, obviously Jerry and his friends, you know, obviously they're connected, right? And then obviously Dan and his friends are connected. And obviously Kelly and her friends are connected. Those are the obvious givens, okay? So, you know, whether Kelly has hundreds or thousands of friends, supporters, people who have pledged allegiance, you know, people who have pledged allegiance to her organization or side, her team. And then, you know, same thing with Jerry, whoever's on Jerry's team, okay? So they're obviously communicating amongst each other. And so I'm saying at some point, you know, at some point, all of when Dan and I are talking to each other, well, Dan turns around and talks to his friends about his conversations with me and what Dan, you know, as far as when they're starting to plan things, plot and scheme, what direction they're going to try and lead me. Well, Dan turns around and talks to his friends. And so obviously because he's talking to his friends, well, his friends are aware of me, right? And then same thing, you know, it's the same thing with Kelly. It's the same thing with Kelly, and it's the same thing with Jerry. You know, Jerry's communicating with his friends and connections about me, so his friends and connections know about me. Okay, and so this is where other things, so then at some point, you know, Jerry, but if Jerry and Kelly are communicating, and then, you know, at some point Kelly introduces some of her friends, well, then you got this web, okay? And then at some point, if Kelly and, you know, if Dan and Kelly are communicating, and then Dan introduces some of his friends to Kelly, we got this web. And then, you know, where you got Jerry communicating with his friends, and at some point Jerry introduces Jerry's friends to Dan. Okay, so you see all these things, all these different webs that are forming. And at some point, you know, Dan's friends, they start communicating with Jerry's friends, right? They got this thing going on. And then Dan's friends are communicating with Kelly's friends. Right, at some point, Kelly's friends start communicating with Jerry's friends. You know? Let's see, who have I not covered yet? You know, you got Jerry's friends, Kelly's friends, Jerry's friends, Dan's friends. Yeah, so all these different connections are there. You know, so there's all these different webs forming. So, and if, you know, the whole objective for Dan, you know, when we're talking about as far as ever being caught, because they never want to get caught, right? They don't want anybody to ever figure out where the source of the problems, of my problems, where are the source of my problems coming from? Who's behind it all? Okay, well, if you are, you know, the shot caller, the ringleader, you know, the one who's pulling all the strings, you're the puppet master, whatever. So, and you, it's just imagine if you're that person and you never want to get caught. Okay, well, one of the steps, and for you to never get caught, one of the steps you would take is to recruit as many people into your, whatever you got, whatever you want to call it, your club, your organization, to recruit as many people as you possibly can to enlighten them with whatever information that you choose to tell them about me, right? And then you start giving them orders to do things to otherwise fuck with me, slander me, undermine everything I'm trying to accomplish, and otherwise destroy my entire life if they can. And if they can get me, if they can do all these things and break my mind and my spirit, well, then they can either get me to commit suicide, or they can get me to pledge allegiance to them. Whatever they can accomplish, you know, they know what they're trying to accomplish. And so they're all of them, they're targeting me, right? But at the same time, they don't want me, not only do they not want me to become aware of this, they don't want me to identify where it's coming from. Say, for example, I catch on to what Dan's got going on, and all of a sudden I'm focusing all of my attention and anger on Dan, and I'm only talking about Dan and nobody but Dan. Well, these two are going to be working behind my back to undermine everything I'm trying to as far as getting him held accountable, whoever I'm trying to reach out to and communicate with, whoever I'm trying to seek help from, whether it's law enforcement, military, FBI. Well, these two are monitoring everything while I'm channeling all of my time and attention telling everybody about Dan. But if I'm not aware of what's actually happening, and I don't know that Kelly might be behind it and Jerry, and all I'm doing is talking about Dan, well, these two are literally going to be working behind my back, and every person that I talk to, they're going to send their friends, you know, even Dan's friends, they're going to go approach everybody and threaten you guys to never help me out or never do anything, or they're going to start coming after you or whatever. You know, they'll destroy your life. They might, in the same time, they might try and recruit you and just tell you that I'm a crazy person, and then they lie to you and twist your mind to make you believe that I'm just batshit crazy, or that I'm dangerous to society, or that I've lost my fucking mind or whatever, and that, you know, don't listen to Brandon, don't listen to anything Brandon has to say. You know, they're trying to do everything in their power between the three of them to keep whoever you are. If you're not one of these three, they're doing everything in their power to keep you from actually seeing the source of our problems. And so, you know, if these three are the ones who are calling the shots, the ones who are behind it, you know, if they're the shot callers, I'm saying they're doing everything in their power to avoid me exposing them to you. They want again, I've told you, they're trying to divert my attention anywhere but on these three, okay? Because if I can you know, I caught my dad. I caught my dad with what happened on this past June 14th, 2024, when, you know, when my dog got drugged and snatched out of the house, and then you know, Jerry tried baiting me into getting into an altercation with him, which probably would have escalated into some type of physical altercation, you know, where him and I start punching each other or something. And who's to say if him and I started getting into a physical altercation, well, who's to say Jerry's friends or Dan's friends or Kelly's friends or Kelly, Dan, any combination of these guys, who's to say that that very moment when Jerry and I got into a physical altercation, that there were microphones in the house or cameras in the house, or there were people outside the house who were listening closely, waiting for the shouting to start. And then as soon as that would all start, all of a sudden you would have law enforcement show up, knock on the door, and then whoever answered the door, law enforcement would say, hey, we got a phone call saying that there might be a public, you know, not a public, but there might be a domestic violence or a disturbance happening at this house, and we're just investigating to see what's going on. We know, you know, because they know about me, so they, you know, they would have reason to come in and see what's going on at the Durgan house because of my previous, you know, because I got arrested in 2019, right? So they have all of that on me, just waiting for the moment for me to mess up again. Therefore, they could have just hauled me away in handcuffs. So if they would have hauled me away in handcuffs this past June 14th, 2024, everything I'm sharing with you now would not exist, because right now, in an alternate scenario, I would be locked up right now or put in some mental institution. So all this information and knowledge, again, that I've been sharing with you for the past 7 months since I've been in my van, none of that information would exist. And all of you who are watching now, and some of this might be making sense to you as far as this scary stuff, and you're realizing what I've been up against. Well, I'm saying in an alternate scenario, had I got locked up in June 14th, 2024, when Jerry and all of them tried getting me, everything you've learned in the past 7 months would not exist. So if you're somebody who is awake now and you're aware now, and now you're on Heavenly Father's side and Jesus is Christ's side, well, anybody who's awake now, you woke up in these past 7 months. At some point, you woke up and you found Jesus and Heavenly Father, so therefore you're saved. You consider yourself someone who's a saved person, a saved soul. Well, everybody who I've saved, you guys would not be saved, and not only would you not be saved, you would not be aware of any of this stuff that I'm presenting to you. And in an alternate scenario, say I did get locked up on June 14th, all of you would have an entirely different perception of me right now, because I would be locked up, and whatever stories, reports, anything that would be written against me while I'm locked up, you guys would have nothing but access to that. And so everybody who's involved with this, they would, anybody who's inside the criminal justice system, whether a judge, a district attorney, a lawyers, the guards at the jail/prison, the arresting officers, whoever is one of these guys' friends that have sold out, whoever was involved with my arrest and incarceration, all of them would probably write their own reports, which is their version of events on what part they, whatever level of involvement they've had. They would write a false report. They would fabricate a false report, a fabricated story, and then they would sign their name and then submit it within the system, therefore committing perjury. But at the same time, nobody would actually know what was happening, and I would get fucking sent away and locked up for life based off all of this nonsense that has been happening all the way since 2018. And here we are in 2025, and they made their biggest attempt just this past 2024, just this last, not even a year ago. And so the cat's out of the bag. Jerry, because they did not succeed with their plan on June 14th, Jerry entirely fucking exposed himself. Not only did he expose himself, but I have confronted him to his face, and I have questioned him about all of this, and I have told him that he belongs in prison for what he did. And ever since then, after I got into my van for 7 months, there's been a lot of crazy shit that has happened. They've tried to murder me. They've tried to murder my dog. They've been trying to make me disappear. And by doing so, they have further exposed themselves and their intentions and what they're trying to accomplish. And because I have survived, I remember and I know what's actually going on. And because I have survived, I can confidently step on camera to share all this with you, knowing what their intentions are, what they're trying to do. And if they're going to do it, I might as well just start telling you guys what's happening. That way, if they actually do get away with it, as far as murdering me, you guys are going to know they're directly responsible in one way or another. They might be the shot callers, But again, the web gets pretty big. I don't know who all is involved. There might be another shot caller out there that I don't even know about. But this is as far as all the people who I've encountered over the past 8 or 9 years, out of anybody who I might be suspicious of, as far as people who I've met face to face, Jerry, Dan, Kelly. And between the three of them and all of their friends, which might be thousands and thousands of them, they have been doing everything in their power to make me disappear, to shut me up, to try and get me to commit suicide, or if they can murder me and get away with it, that's their other strategy. And so I'm just letting you know, back in, when as far as Kelly coming into the equation, as far as me becoming aware of her, that awareness starts, it begins. I became aware of her following my Instagram page sometime around March and April. Okay, sometime around March and April, and then it's, when I told you about Dan telling me about this hit that was on my life, that somebody wanted to assassinate me. Well, it was within less than a week later, Dan told me that he taught, that in the background, there's been these conversations happening, and essentially this assassination has been canceled, and that I can proceed forward not having to worry about people fucking with me. And that's when Dan started telling me I had his blessings and all this stuff, and then people stopped fucking with me. And it wasn't until I actually made it to Montana when people started fucking with me again. And that's, that's around the time Joe got murdered. That's around the time when people started trying to get me to go to the East Coast. So that's when it all started again. But before all that happened in Montana, I had like a 3 or 4 month window when Dan perceived I was really his friend and that I was getting on his side, even though, I'm not really his friend. Dan's just trying to manipulate me in a way where I perceived him as a friend. Okay, so I got to clarify that. And so I had like a 3 or 4 month window when I had nobody fucking with me, and it just appeared as if life was awesome. I'm making all these cool connections. I can do what I want because I got my travel van. Life was awesome at that time. It was great. And then all of a sudden things just flipped over, and all of a sudden I just started seeing this other shit that might be happening in the background, started seeing through the veil, so to speak. And then that's when everything just started to exponentially start getting worse and worse and worse. Okay, so again, I've kind of just been, again, I'm trying to get us right around here, and that's where we're at. But I had to establish where Kelly came into the equation, and then it was right around July time, June, July, when Kelly and I started talking to each other on social media, as far as exchanging comments on each other's posts, or even like private messaging where we just started sending random messages back and forth. Even then, I didn't know who she was. I didn't even know what she looked like. I didn't even know if she was a woman. I think I figured out she was a woman, but I didn't really know what she looked like. Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. I don't really... If I did, I didn't care. I just didn't care. She was just a random person like every other person on social media. I didn't put any significance to her amongst anybody else. She was just somebody who had a pretty large community.
Hello, Moto.
Spam phone call. Coincidence. Anyways, so I'm gonna cut the camera here in a moment, and then I'm gonna continue with right here. Okay, and so now that you can see this web, and you can understand that these connections were not only formed, but there were things happening in the background this entire time, and they still are. This web is still alive and it's active. These people are still out there, and they're still trying to undermine me and make me disappear. So don't think because I'm talking about this happening back in 2018 that it has since dissolved and it's not around anymore. No, it's still active, and it's gotten, the web has grown much more, and it's much more scary and dangerous now than it was back then. Right now, this entire web, for you as a viewer, because you're aware of me, you are connected to this web, which means for you as a viewer, you need to be very vigilant and be paying, excuse me, and you need to be paying attention to your surroundings and the people who are in your life, and start looking closely to figure out if they actually even care about you, or if they're trying to manipulate you or guide you down the bad path, or if they're trying to gatekeep you and block you from becoming aware of what's actually going on. And where you actually start catching on to what's going on, and you turn around to start trying to tell your friends about the things you're becoming aware of, and all of a sudden these people are telling you that they're worried about you. They're worried about your mental health, and they start gaslighting you, accusing you of being delusional, or maybe they think that you might be, they start accusing you of being schizophrenic or whatever. If you start noticing this type of stuff happening in your life, well, understand you're probably surrounded, or maybe you have some rats and snakes who are connected to your circle, your social circle, or this could even be employment, your coworkers. There could be people in your life that are not actually your friend, and they're just actually monitoring you and keeping tabs on you. And the moment you start catching on to this, whether you start publicly talking about this or telling people about what you're catching on to, but all of a sudden you're starting to receive this dark, weird energy, you need to identify what that is, and you need to cut those. You need to get away from them if you can. Just cut ties and get away from them. You can call them out if you want to, but if you call them out, you gotta be prepared to defend yourself, because they're gonna just start to verbally come after you and accuse you of being a psychopath, or that you're crazy, or that you're schizo. They will do everything they can to try and twist your mind to get you to start second guessing yourself and start doubting yourself, and to get you to stop asking these questions and to stop looking around at what's actually going on. That's what they're trying to do. All right, got the board wiped down. So now we're gonna move forward a little bit. And so I mentioned it was sometime around, like, sometime June, sometime around June, July is that's kind of, like I said, that's when Kelly and I started, like, again, the focus is Kelly and I, because that's the direction we're going. So I'm just going to draw. So there's this line is the tether, the tether, the connection. So the focus is right now me and Kelly, and so that you've seen all these other connections, right? But right now I'm focusing on this connection, and eventually the direction we're going, everything else will start making sense. So it doesn't really matter, if you're aware of these other things. Therefore, you should have these connections in your brain so you can visualize this stuff in the background as I'm focusing on specific connections and what was happening during that time. That's how I'm trying to help you get your thoughts organized for everything that's going to be, because really once we start hitting all this, it's going to be a lot of really gnarly, scary, fascinating information, and it's just going to be about, when it comes down to you as the viewer, it's a matter of what you can assemble and retain, because it's just going to be more and more and more and more and more, and it just depends what you can retain. Okay, so that's I'm trying to help you, essentially, right? So the focus right now is me and Kelly, and right now I'm just letting you know how her and I, how this tether started to strengthen, where rather than just being this random person on social media, we started, building bridges of trust, if you want to call it something, building a relationship, friendship, whatever you want to call it. Whatever label you want to slap on that doesn't matter. It has nothing to do with attraction or looking at her as somebody that I'm attracted to or seek any type of romance or any of it. It has nothing to do with any of that. It has everything to do with my perception after looking at her, after a few months had gone by and I became aware of her Instagram account, and therefore I became aware of when she started sharing new content on her page, there were times when she was almost mirroring, replicating a lot of the stuff I was sharing, the stuff I was originating and sharing out of my page. It wasn't infrequent for me to go look at her page where she started sharing information that was on the same theme or general idea of something that I was currently researching or was talking about. Between her and Dan, they started doing this where they started mirroring and mimicking some of the stuff and replicating some of the things I was sharing on my social media. And at the same time, they were playing mind games on me where they were sharing things to try and get me to start researching or looking into certain stuff, therefore deviate and pull my attention into these different forms of mind traps, which also includes their friends who I didn't know were their friends. And they're all playing these games, and they have these different tactics and strategies to try and manipulate my brain and my mind and my perception of reality down these different paths in order to, their overall goal is to not only stop me from finding the truth in what's actually going on, but to warp my mind in such a way where eventually I would pledge allegiance to Dan or Kelly or Jerry or all three of them or just one of them. If there's between the three of them, the question is who's the one at the top. They know between the three of them, but the question for me, I have my suspicions, but I'm just saying I've got all three of them, so it doesn't really matter to me. I'll figure out who's the overall, the head shot caller. I'll figure that out, later on. It's not a big deal. But right now, I'm saying back between, June, July of 2018, while I was in Montana with my dog. It was just my dog and I in Montana. And so while I'm in Montana and I'm doing yard work and landscaping for people that I made connections with, I already described all this, right? So while I'm in Montana doing work, earning my money honestly, when I'm not working, when I wasn't working and I wasn't out exploring or taking my dog out places to go have fun and stuff, when it wasn't about any of that and I was just, sitting tight in my van, hanging out in my van, and I'm on social media, and I'm on, and I'm on Instagram or whatever, just sharing content or having conversations with people who are part of my Instagram community. I was putting a lot of time towards social media back then, a very unhealthy amount of time towards social media. But again, I was aware of things that people might not be aware of, and I was just trying to share the things that I had learned through social media. So there's a whole lot of moving parts and stuff that was happening entirely through the social media reality. That's not even the real world, but it's not even the real world, but the things that were happening through social media were affecting things in the real world. And so that's where I was putting a lot of my time and attention, because when I became aware of mind control, brainwashing, dark magic, and all this stuff that might exist out there, and I could see all of these people, as far as everybody who, any whether it's a YouTube channel or an Instagram account, any given individual that I would go look at their page, if I looked long enough, I could see that these people were not looking. They weren't searching for the source of our problems, humanity, why the world is the way it is. People were, it just depends on who it was. Everybody was on something. They were entirely investing all of their time or most of their energy towards some conspiracy theory or some new age philosophy or something that they had just learned about, whether it's flat earth or anything. It's something that they had just learned about. And, it's a good thing when you start asking questions and you start learning about stuff, and some of the things you learn about, they can be very fascinating. And if you don't check yourself, you can fall into all kinds of traps. You might have found the truth about something, but you have not kept going. You have not continued searching for the truth, such as who you are and why you're here and how to get out and what's beyond. You found something very fascinating and interesting, but you got to keep going. But for me, back then, every account I was coming across, nobody was sharing the core answers, the real answers. But I'm not saying I had the answers back then. I'm just saying I had gone a lot further as far as my research and my awareness levels. I had gone places that it didn't appear many other people had reached yet. And so there's this constant theme of everybody I was encountering not there yet. And so as far as social media, I invested a tremendous amount of time and energy to try and get people caught up. But I'm not saying, even back then I was sharing all types of crazy shit, all types of crazy stuff. But at the same time, I was sharing everything, whether good stuff, positive stuff, bad stuff, scary stuff, terrifying stuff. I was sharing everything that I had found and had been, as far as my mind, everything I had really been exposed to. Back then, it was just like this scatterboard, this collage of everything from good to bad to evil that I was putting on Instagram account. So just depending on who you are and what you were aware of, I was exposing you to all of these different things that you might not have been aware of. And I was always telling people to do your own research and figure things out for yourself. Back then I was, because even back then I didn't have everything figured out, and I was in the process of trying to get things figured out. And in the same breath, I was getting fucked with and gaslighted beyond reckoning. Just the amount of psychic, whether spiritual attacks, psychological attacks coming through social media, or people in the real world always, gang stalkers, people fucking with me in the real world. It was like constantly just all this noise, and I had to figure out how to filter all of that noise out as time moved forward. When I got locked up, yeah, it was a very catastrophic, devastating, scary ordeal for that entire time. But while I was locked up, that's where my mind and my spirit was really refined. As far as, if you just look at this analogy of being forged in fire, or this, if you've heard about like the forging of like a samurai sword, like a samurai sword is like the best sword you could have amongst all the swords out there, as far as how a samurai sword is forged, where you just constantly put it in the fire, take it out, beat the shit out of the metal, put it back in the fire, take it out, beat it out, So getting locked up is at the core of it. I was, as far as who I am now and my ability to share everything that I'm sharing now, a lot of who I am now, I really refined myself and became disciplined in my mind and my spirit, so that even though I told you I was suicidal and I reached rock bottom in jail, I had nowhere to go. I had nowhere to go but inside. I had nowhere to go but within myself. And I had to start, I hit rock bottom, which is essentially the lowest you can go, where you're about to self-terminate. And ever since then, I've been in the process of coming out of the fire with everything that has happened and everything I've learned, to where now, not only am I disciplined, I'm very fucking strong in the context of my mind and my spirit. Physically, I'm in rough shape. Physically right now, if you were just looking at me and you were to meet me, I'm in pretty rough shape. My shoulder's blown out. I'm having all kinds of problems physically, but in my mind and my spirit, I've never been better. Even with everything that has happened, I have climbed out of this dark, scary place that I went into. And I went there on purpose. If you remember, when I did get arrested, I literally made a YouTube video and admitted exactly to what I did, so that law enforcement, I would not take up I would take up as little of law enforcement's time as possible, as far as getting to the bottom of what I did and then figuring out what to do about it. I just, again, I did what I did, went and admitted to it, and then gave them the choice. And when I did admit to it and I made that video, I was very much aware that they would probably come after me rather than going after Dan, Kelly, Jerry, or anybody part of it. I was prepared to go in, to get arrested. I had no idea how long I was going to get locked up, but I was prepared. Even though it was very heartbreaking to get separated from my dog, it was a sacrifice I was willing to make if it meant that eventually, later down the road, we could eventually arrive to where we're at today in 2025, where I have figured shit out, and I have the internal strength and the protection from God, from the archangels. I've survived everything they've thrown at me, and now, as far as my mind and spirit, they can't touch me. They can't get to me, and now I can share all this stuff, especially after they've tried murdering me over these past 7 months. Okay, but I've survived all of it, right? And a lot of that really came down to when I was locked up. I reached rock bottom, and since then, because I have not given up, because I have never given up my faith in Heavenly Father, not only have I survived, I have been given everything: the resilience, the perseverance, the endurance, all of these amazing things to press forward no matter what obstacles I encounter. And so this is kind of like a testimony to God's existence, to Heavenly Father's existence. So if you're a non-believer, maybe you become a believer because of my existence. And the things I'm telling you about why my life went the way it went and why I was behaving the way I was behaving is all coming down really to everything that happened between 2018 and 2019 and 2020, and everything that's really kind of happened since in 2024. So this is, again, the meat and bones. And again, right now the focus is on Kelly and myself, where in between June and July, before Joe got murdered, before all of that shit went down with Joe, Kelly came into my life. And by her and I communicating with each other for, over a period of a few weeks, because we had nothing but positive interactions as far as our communication, she had a positive position within my mind. So as far as all the people on social media who I didn't know about and people who I did know about, Kelly had put herself in this positive position in my mindset where she was somebody, you know, if I wanted to just float something to on social media, I could send her a message, you know, as far as ideas I was coming up with, because based off her Instagram account, she seemed like somebody who was, you know, maybe around the same level I was. You know, I had no idea. I'd never met her. It'd just be a matter of meeting her at some point and figuring out where she's actually at as far as her awareness level and where she's at in her, as far as her life path and her spiritual alignment. I would never know based off social media, but based off our interactions, she was presently sitting in this positive mindset where, because I was living in my travel van and had the flexibility to go where I wanted to, when I wanted to, so long as I had the resources, maybe later down the road, I would, you know, I'd figure out where she lives and I would just drive down there and spend time with her and figure out what's going on with Kelly. You know, if she's on the right side, maybe her and I could start working together, start collaborating, and then we can start helping everybody to an even more amplified way, where rather than just me being out on my own in my travel van doing what I can with what I got, maybe I can find somebody, a like-minded person who's on the same frequency and team as I am, whatever resources and influence or whatever she's got, we can join forces and we can start creating some pretty cool projects where everybody kind of just starts waking up and elevating together, and then we all break free from whatever it is that's going on. We all find our way out of this place, this scary place, right? Because, you know, if you just look around at humanity and what's going on in this world, it looks like everything's going in a very scary, bad direction. And the whole point of what I've been doing is trying to get humanity to stop what we're doing, really have a nice introspective look at what we're doing as far as a collective race. And then maybe we start, you know, maybe turn around and start making a whole lot of adjustments as far as how we're operating so that we can, you know, really get to the bottom of our core problems as far as all this negative shit that most, you know, there's a lot of people out there who are living in poverty, a lot of homeless people, there's a lot of suffering and misery and all this stuff. In order to turn all that around, well, at some point you got to look at the source of where it's coming from, and if you can't even talk about it, well, then you're never going to get to the bottom of anything. And if Kelly and I, maybe if at some point I cross paths with her, this could be a start where we start creating better things to kind of maybe turn things around. I don't know, but none of that stuff would ever come into fruition. None of these ideas I have in mind will ever become possible, or they'll never manifest into reality if I never meet her. So I'm just saying, back then we started building a relationship, and then it wasn't until around December, January when that door opened, where all of a sudden her and I are having this conversation about meeting up and then maybe start creating some projects and working together. So it was kind of this thing where, because I had my travel van, well, actually I didn't have my travel van anymore, and that's what we're going to talk about right now. But I'm going to cut the camera and reset the timer. But this is where we're at now. You know, I've talked about what needs to be said right here. So now we can just really focus on this, and I'll stop. You know, again, I told you at the beginning of this video, I told you in order to proceed forward, we have to go back. Okay, well, we've gone back. Now you have the back story, the back information as far as when Kelly came into the equation. And now we're back where I left off from the previous video, you know, when I was talking about Dan, Michael, and my Christmas light, you know, hanging Christmas lights for my third season. And then, you know, as far as Dan and Michael, I told you about this property that Dan was potentially going to move to in Oregon because Dan and his wife wanted to leave Nevada. So there's a whole lot of moving parts in the context of Dan leaving Nevada and coming down to Oregon. And so because I was hanging Christmas lights in Central Oregon and my employer had introduced me to this guy named Michael, well, now Michael and Dan were connected. Okay, and then it wasn't until later where, you know, I really established. It wasn't until around this time when I really figured out that Dan and Kelly were very, very much connected. And then this is also at the same time when I actually did catch up with Dan and helped him move to his new home, his new place in Oregon. And so all of this stuff is about to start connecting. But I'm about to, pause the camera, and we're right here again. We're right back here. And so I'm going to tie it all together for you. So, do that. So like I said, once we reached, I don't know, about the second week of December, if you think about like hanging Christmas lights, the job that I had, well, around the second week of December is when pretty much the season stops. I mean, if you think about the season, like the total 5-month-long Christmas light season, well, it's like the first 3 months is pretty much putting up lights, and then once, around 2 weeks to a week before Christmas, well, everybody who wants to have lights and spend the money to have a company put up lights for them, that kind of window closes where people are either going to have their lights or they're not, and then by that time nobody's going to put out the money to pay somebody. So there's this window for like about 2 weeks where essentially as far as a Christmas light installation, like myself, I didn't, there wasn't really much to do. I had pretty much had like a 3-week break of having to do any type of work, with exception to, any customers that would call my employer, Brennan, and let them know that there was like a light out or the timer wasn't working correctly. We would go out and do basic maintenance for people who had their lights installed. But where I'm going with this is when we reached that period where we were essentially done hanging Christmas lights, and then we were just waiting for the New Year's to come, and then we would start taking lights down. Well, it was sometime around the beginning of December. I had earned enough money from installing Christmas lights where I started, like, I had a travel van just like this van. It's like almost identical to this van. So that's what I had been driving around for like a year and a half. Well, at that point in my life, I was looking at this idea of kind of upgrading my van to like a small RV, like so I could upgrade the space so I could have a larger space somewhere, like, because in this van I can't stand up all the way upright because I'm too tall. The roof isn't high enough for me to stand up all the way, so I'm always kind of slouched over or have my head slouched down just because the roof isn't high enough. So I wanted to upgrade to an RV where I could, not only would I have space to stand up all right, but I could get a bathroom. I would have a bathroom, an actual bathroom, like a kitchen area. I just wanted to upgrade my space, and I had the money. I had the money to where that option became available to me. So it was around December when I had that money, and I found a. Well, actually, it wasn't me that found it. It was, I told my employer, Brennan, about my idea, about wanting to, like, upgrade to an RV, and then if I found an RV, I would turn around and sell my van. So, whatever amount of money I could get from selling my van, it would kind of offshoot the overall expense from purchasing an RV, So that's, I told my employer all of that, right? Brennan, and I also showed you, if you remember, I showed you the web as far as my connections, the connections between me, Brennan, and Michael, and then eventually Dan, and then I also floated out this possibility that Jerry and Brennan might be connected, if you can remember that visual, okay? So where I'm saying is, when I floated this idea to Brennan about getting an RV, it was like, I don't know, a couple days later when Brennan contacted me, he either called me or texted me, and told me he found an RV on Craigslist, of which he sent me the link so I could look at it and read it, so I could look at the vehicle and read the description on it. And the vehicle was like, it was like a 1988 Ford Mini Winnie. So you can get on Google Images and just type in Ford 1988 Mini Winnie. And if I can find pictures of it, I will attach it into the video. It's going to take a little bit of searching for me to find pictures of my RV. But either way, he sent me a Craigslist link showing me the vehicle. It was on sale. You know, it was a 1988, so it's, you know, something that's over 30 years old. But all the same, it was within my budget, and it was on sale, or it was listed at I think it was like 5,000. It was between like 5,000 or $5,500. It might have been just 5,000 on the nose, but I had the money to buy that, and so and it was being sold in Madras. You know, I lived in Redmond. Brennan lived in Madras, and if you can get on Google Maps, you can look it up. Madras is about 30 minutes north of Redmond, so my employer lived 30 minutes north of me in a city called Madras, and that RV was being sold out of Madras. So I drove my van all the way to Madras, and I met up with my employer, and he went with me to, I think we met the guy who was selling it. We met him at Safeway, like the parking lot at Safeway, a grocery store. If you don't know what Safeway is, it's a grocery store. And that's where we met the guy who was selling the vehicle. So we meet the guy who was selling the vehicle. He, it's in pretty good shape. It's in really good shape. If I can find pictures of it, I'll show you. But otherwise, the exterior was in good shape. No dents, nothing all dinged up. It didn't look like, from outside, it just looked like an older vehicle. But otherwise, it didn't look like a shady, sketchy vehicle or something that looked like it was going to fall apart. It looked like it was pretty sturdy. And then after the guy who owned it, when he fired it up, the engine sounded strong. And then he let me take it for a drive around the block, just to let me, test it out. Long story short, I ended up buying that RV. Okay, so I bought that RV from a guy that, Brennan found the Craigslist ad. So I'm just saying, if everything's being coordinated and orchestrated in the background, right? I'm telling you about Dan, Kelly, Jerry, and all of their friends. And if Brennan is connected to Dan or Jerry or both, and I told them that my intentions were, well, who's to say this RV that I found wasn't just a coincidence, or wasn't the RV that I found, it was the RV that Brennan found. Who's to say it wasn't all just a coincidence, right? Who knows, when I did buy it, who knows what types of things have been done to that RV, because they knew that I would probably buy it if it was the right price point. They just know me enough. They knew me well enough where they knew that would be something I would buy, because it not only, it was a 1988, and it was bigger than, in the vehicle my van I had was a 1988. So and because I had good experiences with my van, I would therefore have no issue buying a 1988 Ford Mini Winnie, because I'm in a 1988, right? I was in a 1988 Ford Econoline. So let's just bump it up to a 1988 Ford Mini Winnie, which is essentially a Ford Econoline, but just converted into a different format as far as the engine and stuff. So they knew I would buy it if there's the right price point. And so who's to say this was not all set up and staged? And I'm saying, when I did receive the vehicle, who's to say there wasn't, microphones or video cameras already put in the vehicle? And who's to say there weren't different types of kill switches or different types of little tricky switches and stuff they could flip within the vehicle, where they could shut off my vehicle, or they could do things that would make my vehicle not perform correctly, so therefore they could open these other doors to make me go down these different directions. And this will make sense for you here shortly. But I'm saying, when I bought that RV, I think Brennan drove the RV to Redmond while I drove my van, because he had to figure out a way to get it back to Redmond. And then once I had my RV and my van at my parents' place, at their house, it was within a couple days that I sold my Econoline. So all of a sudden, I got rid of my second vehicle. Now I have my Ford Mini Winnie. And so here we go. So we got me. Different marker. Hold on, this one's kind of running out. So you got me. And then you got Brennan. Okay, Brennan. Oops. Brennan. And that's where we're kind of focused right now. Okay, so just imagine, I'm not going to draw the RV, but just imagine him, where the focus again is him and I right now. And I've already told you about who he is and my connection to him and where that's all originated from as far as hanging Christmas lights. And I've already told you that Brennan might very well be connected to Jerry and Dan. So but he's also connected to Michael. So there was these 3 people. I've introduced all these other 3. But right now we're focused on him. So I'm saying, once I sold my travel van and got myself in a RV, a mini Winnie, once I had that, well, that's when I started like, okay, cool, I got my RV. Now these possibilities, these new doors are opening where essentially I can literally live in my RV, go wherever I want to, and I literally just have like a little mobile home that I can literally go where I want to, when I want to, so long as I got money. And so now that I got this vehicle, I got to start thinking about how I'm going to start making money, because, I have enough money left over from my Christmas lights to get me going for, maybe a couple months or so. But eventually I'm going to have to figure out a way to generate money to maintain this lifestyle perpetually. If I can accomplish that, that was my goal. And so all of these opportunities and doors started opening as far as my imagination on things that I might be able to accomplish now that I have this RV, this bigger space. There's so much more space. There's a little tiny living room with a table where I can sit and work on my computer if I want to, right? There's a kitchen where I can cook things if I want to. There's a bathroom where I can go do my business if I want to, and I don't have to go drive to a public bathroom and go use a public restroom whenever I gotta, do a number 2. So that became a thing, and I was super excited when I got my RV. I was so excited, okay? So within the first couple days, because before I take off on any big trip or anything, I need to drive my vehicle around, as far as taking care of Milwaukee, going to the grocery store, taking care of errands. For the next few days, I was just driving the vehicle around just to make sure the engine's running safe, just to feel the vehicle out, get adjusted to the dimensions of the RV, because it's quite a bit bigger than my van. So I'm just driving around casually. I didn't care if I was spending money on gas. I was just making sure the vehicle was running fine, because I'm not going to just take off on some big trip not knowing if this thing's going to break down on me, an hour into my trip, and then I have to turn around and get towed and have to get the engine fixed. So that was something I wanted to drive it around a little bit, right? Go ahead, buddy. Here, you want that out of your way? Hold it. Go ahead. Go that way. Rocky, go. Sorry, there's stuff blocking his way. He's gonna move up front. So, after my first few days of driving it around, one morning I took Milwaukee out to the Redmond Fairgrounds to run him, because I can let Milwaukee out of my vehicle and he'll just run next to my vehicle. And there are times when, rather than going on a bike ride or going on a walk, I would take him to a safe place, such as the Redmond Fairgrounds. When I was back home in Redmond, that's where I'd like to take him, where I could just let him out of the vehicle and just drive laps around the grassy area, and he'd just run in the grass, and I could get him to run 3 miles in 15-20 minutes. I didn't rush him. I just let him do what he wanted to do, and I would just drive until the odometer would clock 3 miles, and then I'd load him back up and we'd continue on. But so I took that my new RV out there, right? And while I'm out there, right around the time that Milwaukee got his exercise, I decided to pull the RV off into the grass, and I shut it off. Like, I turned off the engine, and I don't know. I don't know what I was doing. I might have got out, and I might have played with Milwaukee. I can't remember what I did, and I can't remember exactly why I shut off the engine. I'm just telling you, rather than just having Milwaukee jump in the RV and driving off and continuing on our way, well, I'm saying I pulled over into the grass and shut off the engine, and for 10, 15 minutes went by, 5 minutes went by, or whatever. When I tried to fire up my engine, the RV was dead. It would not, like, the engine was entirely dead. I couldn't like the battery was dead, or I don't know, but it wasn't even acting like it was trying to fire up. Like almost like maybe somebody had a kill switch and they flipped a switch to where all of a sudden, even though I'm turning the ignition over, it's not even acting like it's responding, which is really weird. Okay. So, at that time, I'm not a mechanic, and I'm not savvy with mechanics. So, with exception to checking my battery and knowing how to check my oil and add oil, I have figured out how to change an alternator. I've changed my own alternator before, but beyond that, I'm not a mechanic, and I'm pretty stupid when it comes to vehicle mechanics and how to fix things. And I have no shame admitting that it's not a road or knowledge or anything that I've ever pursued or had access to, nor have I had anybody ever spend time teaching me. My own father, Jerry, never taught me anything about mechanics other than you check your oil, right? Or how to check your battery. Beyond that, that's as much as he taught me. But I'm just saying, so when I pulled my RV over and shut off the engine, all of a sudden the engine's like dead, okay? So that morning, after trying to figure out what's going on, I didn't really know what to do. Rather than calling Les Schwab or a tow truck to come get me, I start looking. I try to just be resourceful. I got friends. Or supposedly I got friends. I got connections. I just make a few calls, and maybe Brennan or Jerry can help me out of this situation. Because as far as I was aware, Brennan was he was mechanically savvy. I'm not saying he was a mechanic, but he was mechanically savvy. He might be able to he might be able to instruct me on what I could do to get my vehicle running again. At some point, I can't remember who I called first or contacted first. But at some point, I'm just saying I contacted Jerry. At some point, I contacted Jerry. So I'm going to draw this tether. So we're going to draw Jerry. So I contacted Jerry, let him know my vehicle wasn't running, and I asked him if he could come to drive out to the fairgrounds and with some jumper cables and get me, see if jump starting my van would, or not the van, would see if we could get the RV jump started and get the engine fired up, because if it fires right up, well, maybe I have a battery issue. I don't know, but either way, I'm trying to think. I may have contacted Brennan first, because I didn't know if Brennan was working or if he was in the area, because again, I didn't really have Jerry and him and I, we were, even though I was living with them, I was kind of keeping my space, because if you remember, I told him to stay away from me. Well, that wasn't just for that night. Everything that happened between him and I was just pretty much doing my own thing. Stay away from me, dude, because remember that happened back in May, as far as his eyes turning black and then him and I getting into a thing, and I told him to stay the fuck away from me. Well, all the way fast forward up into December time frame, well, that maintained. Again, I was in Montana. I got out of Oregon for all those months, and then when I came back to Oregon around September, well, again, I was living with my mom and dad, because I've always had a positive relationship with my mom, and I have not let my dad step in the way of my relationship with my mom. I've always been willing to live there, be around my mom, because she needs help in many different ways, and I've always tried to be there for her, to help her in ways that Jerry wouldn't, because I've always been aware of more or less kind of what Jerry's capable of and all that stuff. So I've always tried to maintain a relationship with my mom so that she's not just stuck there alone with him under his influence at all times without ever seeing her son, who she conceived into this world. So I've always tried to maintain that. Okay, so I'm saying when my RV stopped working, I believe I contacted Brennan first and asked him if he was in the area, because if he was, because he's mechanically savvy, he could just stop by and help me get my RV running, and then we could come up with a solution on figuring out why the RV stopped working and where I need to go to get that problem fixed, because that's not a problem I want to be having if I take off and leave Redmond. So I contacted Brennan. I believe Brennan was not in the area, but that's when he floated the idea in my brain. I think he floated the idea in my brain. It was either him or I just contacted Michael on my own. Either Brennan told me to get a hold of Michael because Michael was friends with a mechanic, or it might have been I remembered the mechanic from when I worked with Michael. Either way, it doesn't matter on that part. All I know is I did contact Britton. He was unavailable. So then I turned around and I contacted Jerry and asked him if he could come out to the fairgrounds to give me a jump start. I believe my mom was probably working, so she wasn't able to come do it. I would have asked her first, but, you know, I think she was working. So Jerry comes out to the fairgrounds, and we hook up the jumper cables, and the vehicle fires up right away. Like, right away. It didn't even act like it was having battery issues. Like, so it fires up. But I believe because of what Brennan told me, or I think it was what Brennan told me. I don't think I just thought up Michael on my own. I might have. But either way... Dang timer. Either way, it doesn't really make a difference. I'm just saying, after my vehicle was fired up, the next thing I know, I'm talking to Michael. Okay, so I'm talking to Michael. So this is Michael. So all of a sudden I'm talking to Michael. So, you know, there's that connection, you know, this tether. But at the same time, remember, they are tethered because they're friends, and that's how I got to know Michael. That's how I got introduced to Michael, was through Brennan, okay? So I'm saying I got a hold of Michael, and I believe Michael even came into the equation, because if you remember, when I first came back to Oregon from Montana, and I came early, I arrived early, right? So that that it wasn't time yet to hang the Christmas lights. So I asked Michael if he had work for me, right? So if he knew anybody that had some work to keep me busy until we started hanging lights. And so I told you, Brennan introduced me to Michael, and I told you when I started working to Michael, he had me go out to one of his tenants' houses. Michael owned a bunch of property, right? I mentioned that Michael owned a bunch of property, so at one of his properties outside of the city of Bend, you know, he had me go out there to help out his tenants with digging out a bunch of dead sagebrush and nasty stuff from their pasture area, right? So when I was out there, there was a man living in I don't know if it was I don't know if it was a motorhome or just a large trailer. One of the two. I think it might have been an old motorhome, like a pretty big motorhome. That property had a house, but there was also a guy living in a motorhome, and there was also like a trailer in one of the pasture areas where there was another guy living on the property. So I'm talking about this guy that was living in the motorhome, whom I was introduced to through Michael, and this individual goes by the name Bill. Okay. I don't know his real name. I don't even know his last name, nor do I know Michael's last name. So, but I know his first name, or at least that's the name he gave me. His name was Bill. Okay, so Michael is connected to this guy named Bill, who I met because I was working for Michael. And so because Bill and I were introduced, there's this other connection, okay? So we're starting to look at all these connections. So what I'm saying is, when my RV stopped working, and then Jerry came all the way out to the fairgrounds to jumpstart my RV. Well, because my RV had randomly stopped working, I needed to figure out the source of the problem, which meant I needed to find a mechanic who knew what they were looking for and could solve that problem. And I'm saying is, when I was working for Michael and I had been introduced to Bill, I had learned that Bill was a very good mechanic. I didn't know anything about his knowledge. I just knew that he was a very good mechanic. He was a really good mechanic, which means if I could talk to Michael, maybe Michael could talk to Bill, and then if Bill had time that day or the following day, him and I could cross paths, and then he can work on my RV, and I'll pay him money or whatever. Okay, so that was all set up. Okay. So that same day, I ended up driving out to that same property. I believe I went to that same property. Went out to that same property that I had been working for Michael, and I met up with Bill. And when I met up with Bill, Bill looked at my RV and he told me that that he could work on it, but he didn't have the ability to work on it at that property. And he told me that I needed to meet him out at this other property that was also outside of the city of Bend, okay? Before we even get there, okay? I mean, because that's what I'm going to be talking about now. But as far as, yeah, so Bill ended up, like, I'm just, I'm going to be jumping a few things for just a second. Because Bill had agreed to work on my RV, and because I had just spent a few $1,000s on my RV, and I only had I think I only had like $2,000 or $3,000 left. And I was trying to be very conservative with that money. And because I'm aware of how expensive it can be to get a vehicle fixed when it comes to parts and then labor, between the two, it can get expensive. Well, in my mind, I was, I'm kind of, not knowing what Bill's going to charge me. So that was a thing where he didn't tell me anything about price. But before we get to the part where he was working on my RV, let's backtrack just a little bit. When I had first got my RV, with Brennan, and I was driving it around, testing out things on the RV, getting familiarized with it. Well, the generator / furnace between the two, there was a generator on the RV, and then the heater, like the furnace, like the blower motor, the heater wasn't working. And so Brennan tried to help me fix it, but we couldn't get it fixed. But all the same, during the time when I was at Brennan's house and he was trying to fix it, as I was leaving Brennan's house, Brennan literally gave me it was like a hot water heater for like a motorhome / RV. So if you have, if you got a shower in your RV or motorhome, you could have like a small compacted water heater so you can have hot water, right? Brennan gave me this brand new, it was still in the box, this brand new water heater, and Brennan told me that it had arrived, somebody, UPS or FedEx had delivered it on his porch, and it wasn't something that he had bought. It wasn't something that was even for him. He told me he tried giving it back to UPS, but they wouldn't take it. This is what he told me. I don't know the actual story of it, but he said he didn't need it. It was probably like a $500 water heater or something like that, and he just gave it to me. I don't know anything about it, but he just gave it to me for nothing. And then he just sent me on my way with this water heater that I put in my RV and still in the box, and I had no reason to use it or install it because I probably wasn't ever going to take a shower in my RV because, that's when you have to start adding water and have gray water and all. I wasn't going to mess with any of that. So he gave me this water heater for a random reason, and I'm only mentioning this water heater because that's what I used to pay Bill. Where, like I told you, Bill lived in a motorhome. Well, I'm going to describe all the work Bill did, but I'm just talking, we're talking about these connections and how everybody's connected to each other and how certain things are happening in the background without my awareness. Well, why did Brennan give me a $500 water heater? Okay, I have no fucking idea, but he gave it to me and told me to take it, okay? So then when Bill did work on my RV, he did all types of work on the engine and helped me get my heater working and stuff. So between the two, rather than paying him any money, he did all of that work for no monetary exchange. Maybe I did give him a little bit of money. I don't remember. If I did give him money, it wasn't much. And pretty much I'm saying in exchange for his time and energy to fix my RV, he accepted the water heater that Brandon gave me. It was like a $500 water heater, which he said he would install or use in his motorhome. So what's the coincidence of that? And I'm telling you, well, how do I not know, these things are happening in the background. Well, how do I not know between Michael, Bill, Brennan, maybe Jerry, maybe Dan, they're all putting these things in place, right? So how do I know this water heater was, they knew I would offer it to Bill because they knew Bill was going to be working on my thing. I don't know, but I'm saying, so maybe there's a connection right here, maybe there's a connection right here. And then at the same time, maybe there's a connection right here. Maybe there's a connection right here. maybe there's a connection over here. I don't know. But if you're in law enforcement or whatever, and you've been part of the investigation and you have access to all of these people's phone records and all text messages, whatever, you could figure out all this stuff. I'm just telling you what was happening as far as all the moving parts that were happening around me during this time span. These are the different people who I was meeting and how I was meeting them, how I was being introduced to these people. So I'm just showing you these connections. So, this could be a thing, but it might not be. That's for something, for deeper. I'm not saying the answers aren't out there. I'm not saying that there aren't people out there who already have these answers. I'm just saying, because for you as the viewer, I'm giving you an inside look of my perspective of what was happening back then, as far as, from what I was aware of. I don't know what was happening as far as other people. I can't read their mind. I don't know what they're doing. I can only keep tabs of myself and what was happening around me during that period of time, okay? And remember, Joe was dead. My dad's mom, my grandma was dead. Marley, my mom's dog, had died earlier that year. So there's all that stuff to think about too, okay? So don't forget about these things. But right now, again, we're right in this time span-ish, okay? And when I got, how much time? I got 9 minutes. When I drove, again, we're going to backtrack to when my vehicle needed to be repaired. And I drove to that property that Michael had instructed me to meet up with Bill. Well, when Bill told me to, because he said he couldn't work on it there, but he had all the tools and everything he needed at this other property outside of Bend. Well, he gave me the address and I met him out there. So this address that he had me go to, the address almost looked like an abandoned property. Like, I don't know if anybody was actually living there. It almost looked like a junkyard. There was rundown vehicles, there were dismantled vehicles, there was all types of junk and trash. I don't know about trash, but there's all types of junk and tools and parts, vehicle parts, all types of stuff all over the property. Just all scattered all over, out in the juniper trees and sagebrush. It wasn't a developed property as far as it appearing that anybody lived there. But that's where he had me go to, and that's where he worked on my RV that day. And so once I was out there with Bill, it was just him and I one-on-one while he's working on my RV. And it was during that conversation, at some point, this is when I started catching on that Bill was not just some mechanic. He wasn't just a random person. And that's when Bill started kind of filling me in on some of these things that were happening in the background, where he wasn't actually telling me what was happening on the background, but he was kind of hinting and suggesting stuff for me to become aware of. And that's when I kind of started putting it together that Bill might be connected to law enforcement or the military. And that's when Bill told me that he grew up, I think he said he worked he served in the Navy. From what I remember, Bill told me, I don't know if it's true or not, but as far as my memory, I believe he told me he worked in the Navy, may have worked on, I think he said he worked on aircraft carriers with communications and like mechanics, So Bill was essentially saying that he was really good with electronics, like where he could hack into stuff. He's really good at hacking into stuff. And as far as what he did in the Navy, I don't know, but he just kind of told me these different things. And so that made me become aware of as far as what his background might be in. And then as we progress, as far as other things he told me, he started mentioning about how he is part of something as far as like him being connected to some type of termination, as far as some type of group that terminates evil people. Like, he works for people maybe within law enforcement or outside of law enforcement. But when they find somebody that's evil and bad, and that person, might not get what they deserve through prison, if they find somebody that they want to remove from reality, him and the people he's connected to, they have the ability to stage a car accident or stage things to make somebody die. Like where, say they have a target and that target is driving driving from Redmond to Bend, they have the ability to make that person get into a car accident and die. Right, and so you have a traffic fatality on the highway, and their target is now dead. And he was telling me about their connections they have with media as far as news coverage, where if there are specific people that they do not want identified, as far as the press, as far as the news, they talk to people who work for the news organizations, and they communicate. Yeah, it's like, yes, there is a traffic fatality, but this is the story that you're going to stick to, and you're not going to identify the person who died, and you're not going to identify what that person was up to. That way, people, as far as the public perception, as far as what the public is aware of, all they know is that there was a traffic fatality and that, somebody died, and then that there's a funeral in a week or whatever, and then they just spin a story. Okay, so Bill's telling me that he's connected to the people who were part of that. Like, that's their job, is to make these things happen, where if they find an evil, bad person, they can make these things happen. So I became aware of that. And so, as Bill's telling me this stuff as he's working on my RV, and it's just him and I one-on-one, at some point, I don't know, around that time, because, around this time, because of all the things that had happened, I started noticing, like, helicopters, like low-flying helicopters, and like low-flying single propeller airplanes that were, it just appeared like I was always being followed around. Not necessarily, I mean, I don't know to what extent, but I was always noticing different types of helicopters that were flying. It didn't matter where I was at, whether I was in Redmond or Sisters or anywhere. I started noticing these helicopters, these low-flying, slow-flying helicopters and airplanes that just seemed to be following me around. I just kind of started noticing this stuff, and I started kind of scratching my head, wondering, like, okay, considering everything I've been involved with and tied to over this year, it wouldn't surprise me if they were following me. It's just something I had tuned into. So when I was talking to Bill and he was telling me all this stuff, well, I believe I mentioned that to him as far as the helicopters and aircraft, and then that's when Bill told me, he's like, yeah, we have a whole fleet of helicopters and airplanes that and he kind of told me about what they do. And while Bill was telling me about what they do and that there's a fleet of them. It's just him and I standing out at this, this property on the outside of Bend. It looked like a junkyard. And all of a sudden, this low-flying airplane is flying. I mean, it's low-flying and really slow. It flew directly over our heads. And as it's flying over our heads, Bill waved at the plane. And so whoever the pilot was, he kind of dipped his wing. So all of a sudden, the plane kind of goes like this. And, just a dip is like an acknowledgement, kind of like waving at him, and the pilot's waving back by dipping his wing. And the plane kept flying straight over our heads, and he went out, maybe half mile. And then I'm just watching this as Bill's describing it. And then this plane just slowly turns around, does a complete 180, and it flies right back over our head, really low and slow. And then it disappears over the tree line, and then that was it. It was gone. It was gone. Never saw it again. And so I'm like, wow, okay, well, I guess my suspicions were correct. These things were happening, and Bill just confirmed that, right? So that's where, as far as here today in 2000, as far as 2024, 2025, and I've mentioned the airplanes, and if you followed my channel, there were certain videos where I showed videos of the airplanes. So it's not just me making up. My knowledge of the airplanes originated from this individual named Bill, who worked for the Navy, or retired Navy, retired Naval Intelligence, or retired, whatever his position was. I don't know. Maybe you guys have access to it. But Bill told me all these things. And then after the airplane incident, that's when Bill told me, as far as Bend, the city of Bend, that's when Bill told me that there was an underground military base underneath the city of Bend, like a full-on military base dug out as far as tunnels and passages and giant cavern. It's like a underground military base. As far as what you perceive a military base, it's under the city. And he told me that there was an entrance to, there's always multiple entrances, and there's ways to get in. But he told me there was an entrance not far from where this, from where we were working on the RV. He told me there's an entrance just down the road. He never took me there. That's where I started getting really curious, like, oh, what's down there, because that's when he told me this, all of a sudden I started having flashbacks of, I don't know, whether it might have been earlier that year or a few years prior, where from Redmond to Bend, there's a railroad tracks. There's a railroad that goes through Central Oregon. There were multiple times when I saw trains coming through, and the entire train, I'm talking whether 50 to 75 to 100 cars, all flatbed train cars, and on top of every train car was either like an Abrams tank or a Humvee or an MRAP, just like all types of military vehicles. And there were multiple times that I saw entire trains with nothing but military armored vehicles going through Redmond. And so he's, all of a sudden these different connections are being made, and start thinking about underground military bases, and then seeing a train. I've personally seen these trains full of military vehicles and tanks and stuff going from north to south, traveling southbound towards Bend, and then there's a military base underneath Bend. Wow. Okay, well, where'd that train car go? Is there all types of tanks and vehicles stored underground, all types of shit, right? So that's when Bill came into the equation, and then I started really becoming aware of a lot of stuff happening in the background, as far as maybe there's some type of giant operation or some type of giant investigation taking place, and there's just maybe this possibility I'm caught in it and I'm in the middle of some shit, and there's this possibility that I might be, I might have all types of people following me around and keeping tabs on me and watching, whatever side they're on. I have no idea, but I'm becoming aware that there might be a whole lot of scary stuff and very significant things happening in the background beyond my awareness, right? And I'm like in the middle of it, and it might have something to do with DMT, might have something to do with Dan, and it wouldn't be until a little bit later where I found out that it might have everything to do with Dan, Kelly, and Jerry, and all of their friends, who all of them might just very well be a bunch of bad apples that have all infiltrated different layers of society. So as far as all this chaos and messed up stuff that's happening within the United States and also around the world, it's like, you've heard this expression where if the United States falls, it's not going to be from some external threat. It's going to, if the United States ever falls, it's going to fall from within. It's going to collapse from within. So if you take that idea and expand upon it and wonder, what does that even mean? Well, it means that the enemy is going to infiltrate the United States from within, and there's a good possibility that once they do infiltrate the United States, given enough time and opportunity, they will spread out and infiltrate all layers of society, from the lowest layers of society, as far as homeless people, people who are in poverty, as far as everybody who lives there. They're going to have people within there, fueling all the shit you see as far as what's happening in the hoods, in these poverty areas. So you're going to have people, that's where drug trafficking and human trafficking, all that stuff really comes into the equation. And then you're going to have, as far as all layers of society getting infiltrated, that includes all layers of government, whether local government, city government, county government, state government, federal government, all the way up into, what's happening in Washington, D.C., and politics. Everything is infiltrated and being corrupted by people who have sold out, and they're taking orders from bad guys who are calling the shots in the background, and you don't know anything about them, right? So there's all this scary stuff happening in the background, and I was finding out I might very well be caught in the middle of this, and it just, depending on which direction I go, is going to affect how my life is going to turn out, okay? So I'm becoming aware of all this stuff as we're reaching December, January. I'm becoming aware of, I don't have any of a lot of the connections that I have now, I had not yet put together back then. I was just in the process of observing everything happening as it was happening, and I was just blindly just living day by day. I was just going day by day. I had just going day by day with my dog, and I was just doing the best I could while not really know what's going on. I was just suspicious. There was a lot of crazy, very serious stuff happening in the background, as if there's just this giant fight in the background. And depending on what direction this goes, things could get really bad, or things might start moving in a more positive direction. And if you know much about my story, well, things have been getting pretty bad, as if you just follow the path that I was on. And if you know much about what happened later down the road, you can see that things started getting pretty bad. And I was aware that's where I was going, and there was nothing I could do about it. All I could do was do my best, stay vigilant, and pay attention. And if I can survive, I can survive. But if I die, well, I guess that's the end. I did my best, right? So, with that said, when I told you Bill was working on my RV, well, the first afternoon / evening that Bill worked on my RV, I believe it was a 2-day thing. I can't remember. Maybe he did it all on one day. I can't remember if he did all the work in one day and fixed everything all in one day, or if it was a 2-day thing. But I'm saying it might have all been in one day. First, he fixed while it was daylight hours. I believe he fixed the issue with my he fixed things within the engine to give my engine better airflow, so that I would not overheat when I'm driving across mountain passes. So I think he changed spark plugs, and he changed a few things that gave me better airflow. And I guess he might have fixed the issue with my vehicle not firing up. Of course, again, that might have just been a kill switch to lead me towards Bill. Like there might be, they might have had, like I said, they might have had different types of contraptions installed before I even took ownership of the vehicle through Brennan, right? And so, and part of how I have arrived to that conclusion is after Bill had got my engine fixed, I still needed to get the heater, the blower motor inside my RV fixed, because I wasn't able to get heat in the backside, like the back cab, like the back half of the van. And so rather than working on that at that property, I ended up driving my RV and followed Bill to Michael's house, so now we were outside of Michael's house, outside parked on the street, working on the RV, because the blower motor's inside the vehicle, so therefore we can turn on the interior lights while Bill worked on it, because it was December, it gets dark early. It's dark by like 5:30 p.m. So just because it was dark doesn't mean it was late, and that didn't mean Bill was done working on it, because I guess he was somebody who had no issue staying up late, and so he said he would continue working on it. So while him and I are inside my RV, inside the living space, and he's like laying down on the floor, working on the thing, while I'm handing him tools, holding the flashlight so he can see, and then he's talking to me while he's working. And where I'm going with this, at some point while we were talking, he mentioned something about having like an RF scanner, like a radio frequency scanner. I don't know I can't remember exactly what he said, but he brought up having a radio frequency scanner, and like joking around about, I don't know if he was talking about scanning stuff to see if there's microphones. And so I think I joked back with him and said, well, if you have one of those, maybe you should get one and scan my RV to see if there's microphones or cameras in my van. That way I know. And he just looked at me and got this big grin on his face. And, kind of almost like without telling me, almost hinting that my RV was totally bugged. It had microphones and or video cameras. And so ever since then, from that point forward, when I did separate from Bill and everybody, and I did continue forward and leave Central Oregon, I always had this idea that, there's probably microphones and all that in my RV, and so I treated it all accordingly to some capacity. I just had this idea that it was happening because I was tuning into things. Why would Bill tell me this stuff if it wasn't a thing, And so that was a thing. And it was when Bill and I were outside of Michael's house, when, as Bill's working on my RV, outside of Michael's house. That's when eventually Michael came outside of his house to talk to Bill. And as he's talking to Bill, that's when Michael came outside his house with that woman I told you about, that woman that Michael was either dating or engaged to, and she was a billionaire. So this woman, that Michael's dating or being romantic with, he's dating or married to a billionaire. Okay, so who is this woman? I have no idea who she is, but that's a connection. And then at the same time, that same night when Bill was working on all this, and I'm seeing all these different characters and people being introduced to these different people, that's when this other individual, who I'll just draw him up here. That's when this individual named Rabbit. I don't know what his real name is, but that's when this individual named Rabbit comes into the equation in the context of me becoming aware, knowing who this person is, seeing this person's face, and then because Rabbit showed up at Michael's house, well, Rabbit showed up to talk to Michael. Okay, so Rabbit showed up to talk to Michael, and so it was while I was talking to Michael when Rabbit showed up out of nowhere. I can't remember where that woman went, but I think she left, and it was just I think it was like Bill, Michael, and I talking, and then all of a sudden Rabbit showed up out of nowhere to talk to Michael. Okay, so I didn't know anything about Rabbit. Just looking at him as he's talking to Michael, I learned that his name was Rabbit, and beyond that, and just knowing what his face looked like, other than knowing his name and his face and seeing him. Other than that, I knew nothing about the guy. Okay, but all the same, Rabbit and Michael are connected. And from what I learned, Rabbit and Bill know each other. So there's this other connection right here. So from Rabbit to Bill. What their connection is, not really sure. I had no idea at the time, but because Rabbit, Bill, myself, and Michael were all in attendance at the same place, the four of us are all connected, so the three of them all know each other, right? So all of a sudden, because I crossed paths with Rabbit, all of a sudden there's another connection. So there's this other connection right here, okay? So I became aware of this person named Rabbit, and then Rabbit disappeared, okay? So I'm aware of this. And then from this point forward, after, Michael walked off, Rabbit walked off, and then it was just Bill and I again, and then I don't know, sometime around 8, 9, 10 o'clock or so in the evening, p.m., 8, 9, 10 p.m. or so. That's when Bill finished working on the heater in my van and got it working for me. And so from that point forward, my time spent with Bill was coming to a conclusion. And so before we parted ways, I gave Bill that hot water heater that Brennan had given me. I was asking Bill what I could give him for his time, gave him the offer. I offered the water heater because I knew Bill lived in a motorhome and he accepted it. And then I asked him if he wanted any money. I might have given him like $200. I can't remember how much I gave him, but I think I gave him a little bit of cash too. So between that, Bill said that was good. He didn't want any more money than what I gave him. And then right before parting ways, Bill gave me a big hug. He gave me a really big hug for no reason. I didn't know the guy other than him just helping me out and the things that he had shared with me. Other than the things he shared with me, I knew nothing about the guy, and I had no idea what he knew about me. But before we parted ways, he gave me a really big hug and wished me luck. He wished me luck on what was ahead. I had no idea where I was going or what was going to happen, but he wished me luck. And he wished the best for me. And then, either he drove off or I fired up my RV and then I left and I went somewhere else. I can't remember, but that was the last time I ever saw Bill. Okay, that was the last time other than him working on the RV, other than being introduced to him and then him working on the RV, that's the only bit of time I've ever spent with this individual, okay? But all of this stuff happened. All these things happened. All these connections were made. So therefore, I'm aware of all this stuff. Even though I didn't know what was going on, I'm aware of these people. I'm aware that there's stuff happening in the background. And so I'm just going to continue moving forward with this unknown path that I'm heading down, trying to find the source of what the fuck is even going on. Okay, so I got 6 minutes, and so the whole again, for the whole purpose, I'm bringing us to Kelly. Kelly's going to be the main focus of the conversation as we're moving forward. We're almost there yet. So all these connections are being made. And so when I got that RV, and I told you about, now I got the RV, and now all these possibilities are open. Now all these things are possible that I can try accomplishing and doing. And now I'm starting to look at who can I go meet up with and maybe start putting together some really cool projects, maybe, right? Who can I meet up with? Well, I told you I had been establishing some type of friendly relationship with this individual named Collectively Unstable, which is Kelly, and so as time moved forward, she had maintained that position as far as being in a positive, maintaining this positive, I had this positive perception of her as if she was somebody that might be on my frequency or somebody that would get on board with these ideas that I have, and we could work together, and she could use her community and I could use my community, and we can all get this information out to as many people as we can possibly get it out to. That's what I was thinking. So I'm saying when I got my RV, as soon as I got my RV and I started looking at these possibilities, around that time, that's when I contacted Kelly. I contacted Kelly on Instagram, and that's essentially where I told her about my RV, and then I think I might have pitched out this idea to her, and she sounded like she was all on board with it. Like, she's like, hell yeah, let's do it, or whatever. And so at that point, I figured, I started asking like where she lives. She tells me she lives in Eureka, California, and then she invites me to come on down. Well, I tell her that I want to, maybe we should meet up or something. So she invites me to come down there. So this door can open where all of these ideas that I have, maybe it can all start manifesting and becoming a real thing where we can all start elevating and lifting up together, But the only way to get there, I gotta get to Kelly first, So I'm not gonna draw her on the board right now, but that's what I'm saying. My hope, once I got my RV and I got everything, I met Bill and Bill shared everything with me and I got my RV fixed. Well, as soon as my RV was fixed, I ended up rather than sticking around Central Oregon until February and finish, rather than continuing to work with Brennan and taking down Christmas lights, I essentially quit. I quit hanging Christmas lights. I quit working for Brennan because after everything that happened, after everything that had happened as far as Joe getting murdered and Dan and then my grandma dying, and then everything that happened in Montana, there was a lot of tension between Jerry and I. I was starting to pick up that Jerry might very well be connected to Dan. And, because I've told you about Jerry calling me and begging for forgiveness and trying to get me not to go down to Las Vegas, even though I had never told him that I was going to Las Vegas. So because I had formed that connection that Jerry might have very well been the one who signed off on having me assassinated, which is why Dan told me I had a hit on my life. Well, I was aware of Jerry, and I told you that I had told him to stay the fuck away from me. Well, because of everything that had happened, there was still so much going on in the background where at some point in time, sometime around the end of November, December-ish, there was a time when I approached my employer, Brennan, and I tried getting help from him. I think I tried telling him a little bit about what had happened, during this time frame, and Brennan was not receptive to anything I had shared. He listened to what I had to say, but he essentially just kind of like shrugging his shoulders or acting ignorant or acting like he wanted nothing to do what I had on my plate. Yeah, he kind of just gave me, just kind of brushed me off. And I took offense to that because I really opened up to him. I even cried in front of him. I tried telling him about this stuff that was happening, and I couldn't help myself. I came to tears in front of him. And then rather than getting any type of help, he kind of just like sent me on my way without any type of resolution or support or nothing. So that rubbed me wrong. It kind of offended me and just kind of let me know that Brennan might not actually care about me. So why would I stick around and take down Christmas lights if it's just going to be this fake relationship and he's just using me as a form of labor for his own financial benefit for his own business? At that point in time, I just walked away from what he had going on and I quit. And because I quit, and now I had my RV and I was looking forward at what's actually going on and knowing what's going on as far as this scary stuff that's happening and trying to figure out how I can communicate this to the world if I can to help people. Well, now that I'm not working anymore, well, let me try and, there's Kelly. Kelly seems to be maybe on the same page as me. Maybe she's somebody I can go to and we can start working. Sorry, my battery died. Battery died and camera shut off while I was mid-sentence. But I was saying, I was thinking that, maybe I could go down and catch up with Kelly and we could start working together. That's pretty much the foundation of my entire reason for going down there, was because I had this idea that maybe I thought she was a good person. I thought she was going to be a very positive, good person. Go ahead, buddy. Yeah, you go ahead. That was my whole thing. I because of all the positive conversations her and I had the impression that she was going to be somebody that I could not only get along with, but somebody that was on the same, not only the same frequency, but the same path and had the same, somebody that had more or less figured it out, so that's what I thought, because that's how she presented herself. And so because I was looking to make genuine, authentic connections with people I had met, whether out in the world or through social media, and then through social media we would eventually maybe meet in real life and then start working together. But I'm very selective on who I choose to meet. I don't just go meet anybody. As far as random people on social media, between Dan and Kelly, there's only a handful, very small number of people who I've actually met through social media, and that's just a thing. It's something was not really, I have no issue putting myself on social media and sharing things about me. But as far as people contacting me and me just going and meeting random people, that hasn't been a thing, because I'm very aware that not everybody is who they present themselves to be. And so I'm very much aware that people can tell me whatever they want to tell me just to make me perceive that they are somebody that they're not, just so they can get something from me or take advantage of me or mooch off of something that I got. They just do that. I've been aware of it. That's been something that I've encountered for my majority of my life. So if when I have met people through social media, it's because there are very specific reasons, and I have reasons for going forward with crossing paths with them. And I'm just establishing, as far as me going to meet Kelly, it was because there was, for a good chunk of almost 8 months, she had done a pretty good job at illustrating herself as somebody that's on somewhere around in the same ballpark that I've been in the same arena that I've been in, as an analogy. And so that's where I kind of just, well, if she's in the same arena as me, well, maybe I should just go meet her, see what she's all about, and if she is everything that she's presenting herself to be, then we can look at maybe making some projects, making some projects, and then bringing, collaborating and working together to benefit everybody else who was watching. Between my community back then, I had around 11,000, 12,000 subscribers. So there's a lot of eyes on me, and then whatever Kelly's community was, well, there's a lot of eyes on her. And then when both communities are becoming aware of each other, my community became aware of Kelly through me, and Kelly's community became aware of me through Kelly. So it was a thing where everybody was becoming aware of each other, right? And so, because I had pure intentions, I was looking big picture. Well, if Kelly's a good person, well, let's try and help everybody to the best of our ability, and let's grow something awesome if we can. But you can never get there. You can never even know if that's a possible thing unless you're willing to take a chance. For example, I was willing to take a chance, so I drove my it wasn't a new vehicle, but it was my new RV, even though it was 30 years old, in 1988. So back then, I think it was, how old was I back then? 2018? I think I was around 30 years old, right? So, I'm in a vehicle that was just as old as I was, and so let's go see what Kelly's got going on, and maybe some really cool stuff will happen. So that was when I quit working. When I told Brennan I wasn't gonna take down Christmas lights, so therefore I'm essentially letting him know I quit. Well, I ended up leaving Central Oregon. I don't know, a few days before Christmas. I ended up leaving Central Oregon and getting away from my family before Christmas, and I was not home during Christmas for Jerry and Cindy and my sister and her family. I was not at home during that time. I left and I went, and by Christmas, that's when I don't know, did I spend Christmas at Kelly's house? I can't remember. I think so. I might have been in Eureka during Christmas. I can't remember. It doesn't really matter to me. that detail doesn't really matter to me. But I ended up. I'm just saying. I believe I left Central Oregon a few days before Christmas, and essentially left Oregon, went into Northwest California, and that's where I crossed paths with her. That's where it all began, and that was my intentions behind going down there. Whatever Kelly was up to in the background, well, this is, as we continue moving forward, I will be hinting at things, and eventually you'll catch on, because I'm going to tell you there were things happening in the background, just like with when I met Dan in Las Vegas. There were things happening in the background, people talking amongst each other, deals being made, plots and scheming being put into motion. People were being pulled in. They were hiring people and giving them different jobs and roles as far as, future people I would be introduced to, and what their job was as far as how they were going to illustrate themselves to me, so I have a misperception of who they are and what they're about and what they're doing in the background. They're setting up all this stuff in the background because, again, their overall objective is to warp my perception of reality in such a way where all of these sadistic people who are part of it, where I perceive them as my friends, so therefore at some point I pledge allegiance to something that I don't even know that's happening. I just pledge myself to them for whatever reason, and then in exchange I get something in return, whatever that might be. It's probably something that would be really beneficial or something that I want, that they know I want. They would give that to me, but once that deal is made, I am essentially their slave. I'm their puppet. I do what they say. So that's what their objective has been in the background, and that's the direction they were trying to lead me towards and manipulate my brain in the process. So once I got to the destination, my mind would be so twisted that when they were ready to do whatever it is that they wanted to do, they had me. Like I would essentially be stuck within an eternal trap that I would never be able to escape from, especially if I pledged allegiance to them and essentially sold my soul. Had I done that, well, everything you're learning now would not be a thing. Everything I've experienced and have survived, that wouldn't have been a thing. And whoever you are, whatever you got going on, your entire perception of reality would be just as twisted and fucked as mine is right now, because everything you've learned through me wouldn't even exist. And not only would it not exist, they probably would have still given me the green light to talk on YouTube, but everything I shared with you in this alternate scenario, I would be telling you, I might be perceiving I'm telling you the truth, but in the background they think they're controlling things, and so whatever I tell you, your everything that you got going on is getting twisted too. So that's what they tried to do. And I'm telling you right now, not only have I survived it and have learned what they've got going on, whatever they have done since then to you, whoever you are, if you got pulled into this web a long time ago, years ago, over a decade ago, or maybe just a few months ago, and they have for however long you've been pulled into this, if you're starting to see that they twisted your perception of reality and everything I'm sharing with you is really starting to make sense, and it's starting to bother you psychologically, it's starting to bother you, right? Because this is very dark and sadistic, fucked up stuff. And I'm telling you, they have had you under mind control for a very long time, and all of this stuff has been happening in the background without many of you even knowing that this is even possible, but it is. It's possible, and it has been happening, and many of you have been tricked and lied to before you even knew anything about me. When they introduced you introduced you to me about, where you became aware of my existence, they had already warped your perception of reality. So when you found me, you had this idea about me that wasn't even true, because you haven't even given me an opportunity. We haven't even hung out. We haven't even spent time together. So whatever you thought you've known about me is probably a big fat lie, and whoever it was that told you about me are the ones who lied to you, and they probably did it on purpose. And then all the bad, messed up stuff that's happened since then is a product of some of, Jerry, Kelly, and Dan, and all of those who have pledged themselves to them. They've all been they feel like they've been pulling all these strings, therefore putting all of you into some type of psychological trap to where you don't even know what the fuck's going on. You're looking at me like I'm the bad guy, like I'm the enemy, like I'm dangerous, like I'm some crazy person. And I'm telling you, no, you guys, they are fucking with your brain right now, and that's what psychological and spiritual warfare is. It's like putting on contact lenses that shield your eyes from reality. So whatever reality you perceive, you're seeing a fake fucking reality, because they put viruses and they hacked your mind. They hacked your mind, and you can see where I'm going with this, right? Hopefully I've just broken you free from some traps you've been in, just from speaking for the last 20 minutes or last hour. Hopefully I've broken you free from some very scary traps right now. And so I'm going to try to kind of slow it down a little bit. Okay, I'm going to slow it down, and I'm going to just let you know this video is going to be coming to an end here in a short bit. We're not going to keep pressing forward, because I've been talking for a while and I'm starting to get tired. But I'm just letting you know as far as the timeline. So I told you, I've introduced Kelly to you. I've told you about how, what she did as far as me perceiving she was a good person over these periods of months, where once I ended up getting my RV, she was the one I went to right after I got my RV, because I thought her and I could work together and good things would happen for everybody. So I've explained all that, and so as I conclude this video, I'm just letting you know when the next video starts. This is where shit's gonna get even more scarier. If I've already scared you, I probably have. I'm just letting you know everything's gonna progressively get more and more scary. So if you think I can't scare you anymore, I promise you I can scare you much, much more. And I'm trying to slow it down, and I'm trying to bring you back to center to let you know it's okay. It's okay, you guys, because remember, I've survived. I've already made it through. I've made it through the big scary part. It's okay. So if you're still here, it's okay. And we're just in storytelling mode, and I'm letting you know what has happened in the past. And so when the next video starts, that's when I'll start talking about what, everything that happened at Kelly's house when I arrived. I'll let you know as much as I can remember as far as what went down inside her house as I'm able to remember it. And I'll try and just stick with the key points, and I'll try and filter out anything that's, anything irrelevant, stuff that's not really important. I'm just going to try to keep us focused, because again, my goal, because we got to continue moving forward, so I can only spend so much time talking about any given thing, but I'm just trying to stay on the key points to help you figure out where all these connections are forming and what's happening while these connections are forming, and where my mind is as it's all happening, and what my perception is, and what my intent was, and why I ended up going the path that I did, and why I made the choices I did. There's all these variables, okay? And so I'm just trying to slow it down, let you know it's okay. As far as me telling the story, I know what I'm doing. I know what I'm doing. I've got it all. I've got my end under control, and so I'm just trying to remind you, keep yourself centered. Don't, whatever scary stuff you're learning, whether it's stuff that's scaring you about what happened to me, or you're learning things that might be happening around you and that's scaring you, or maybe you're becoming more aware of this reality and that's scaring you. I'm just trying to bring you back. It's okay. I'm here with you, and I'm explaining it to you to help you through whatever darkness whatever darkness is coming into your brain, and wherever your mind is going and you find yourself going to any scary places. I'm grabbing onto you, pulling you back, letting you know I'm still here with you, and it's okay. So long as you keep going, because again, I'm going to make another video. So long as you don't give up on me and you click on the next video as it's available and you push through that, and then the video after that, I am leading you home. I'm trying to bring you home because I've been home and I know how to get there. But in order to get there, I have to help you break through your own dark barriers. Whatever hypnotism, dark magic, whatever messed up stuff has happened to you, I'm trying to break down your barriers to get through to you, to the real you. I'm trying to get through to the real inner you and pull you out of your scary places and follow me. Just follow me and I'll bring you home if you can trust me and not abandon and not go take off running because you're terrified. It's okay. I'm right here with you. I'm down on the ground with you, and it's okay. So with that said, I'm going to stop this video now. So whoever you are, wherever you are, just go take a breath, go outside, take a breath, go for a walk. If you have a dog, go pet your dog or cat, go spend time with your animal and get yourself calmed down, because it's okay. And I'm just saying, have a good evening, a good afternoon or morning, wherever you are. And when you click on the next video, we're going to continue forward. And just have your mind prepared. When you click on the next video, make sure you have yourself centered. You're putting yourself in a neutral perspective, and you're taking everything you've learned, and we're just moving forward. Okay? So, there you go.